Explain the chain of responsibility design pattern. The chain of responsibility is a behavioral design pattern that allows multiple objects to process a request without the sender knowing which object will handle it. Instead of binding a request to a single handler, this pattern creates a chain of handlers. The request moves through the chain until one of the handlers processes it. In simple terms, you pass a request along a pipeline, and the first handler that can process it takes responsibility. This pattern is helpful when different types of tasks need to be handled in different ways, and you want to keep the code flexible, loosely coupled, and open to adding new handlers without modifying existing logic. Examples include logging systems, authentication pipelines, exception handling, event processing, and filtering frameworks. To understand this very clearly, let's take a real and practical example used in many interview explanations. We will build a logging system that supports 3 log levels. Each log level will have its own handler. Info logs are handled by the info logger. Debug logs are handled by the debug logger. Error logs are handled by the error logger. Each logger decides whether to handle the message based on the log level. If that logger cannot handle it, it simply passes the request to the next logger in the chain. This is the perfect demonstration of the chain of responsibility pattern. Here is the complete working example. We begin by creating an abstract class named logger. This class contains a log level, a reference to the next logger in the chain, and a method named logMessage that processes the incoming request. Inside logMessage, we first check if the current logger can handle the message based on its level. If yes, we call the write method to print the message. Then, regardless of whether we handled it or not, we pass the request to the next logger if a next logger exists. This is how the request travels through the chain. Next, we create 3 concrete logger classes: info logger, debug logger, and error logger. Each class sets its own level inside the constructor and overrides the write method to print a message with the correct prefix. In the main class, we build the chain in the method named buildChain. We create error logger first, then we create debug logger, then we create info logger. We set the next logger in a top-down manner. Error loggers next is debug logger. Debug loggers next is info logger. So the chain structure becomes error to debug to info. We first log an info message. Application started. The request enters the first logger, which is error logger. Its level is error, which is higher than info, so error logger does not print anything. It passes the request to debug logger. Debug logger receives the request. Its level is debug, which is also higher than info, so it passes the request to info logger. Info logger receives the request. Its level matches, so it prints info application started. Next, we log a debug message, loading configuration. The error logger receives it first and passes it forward. Then the debug logger receives it, matches the level, and prints debug, loading configuration. Finally, we log an error message. Something went wrong. This time, error logger receives it and handles it immediately by printing error, something went wrong. The debug logger and info logger also receive the message, but since the check allows forwarding, they will print their own messages too. This behavior can be tuned depending on project requirements. If we want only a single handler to process the request, we can stop forwarding after one handler handles it. If we want all handlers to process it that match the criteria, we let the request flow through. This example shows very clearly how the chain of responsibility moves a request through multiple handlers until the correct one takes responsibility. Now let's see. When should you use this pattern? Use this pattern when multiple objects can handle the same request and you want to avoid hard coding conditional logic like multiple if-else blocks. Use it when the request handling logic must be flexible and new handlers should be easy to add without modifying existing classes. This pattern keeps the code flexible and avoids tight coupling between sender and receiver. Here is the short version you can speak directly in your interview. The chain of responsibility is a behavioral pattern that sends a request through a chain of handlers. Each handler decides whether to process the request or pass it to the next handler. It removes the tight coupling between the sender and the receiver and makes the system flexible for adding or removing handlers. In the logging example, info messages are handled by the info logger, debug by the debug logger, and error by the error logger. The request flows through the chain until it finds the right handler. That is the complete explanation of the chain of responsibility design pattern.